So welcome everybody. It's Helen Patterson from Life Works Well. And our last series of mentor circles is about back to school, back to work, and back to basics. We're 6 months in to the pandemic, and it has been such a whirlwind. I don't know about everybody, but I'm feeling the energy shift all the time, and it's very draining for especially those that are in the HR profession. So I started this mentor circle series back in April when we first started dealing with COVID-19, and it's primarily for small and medium business leaders. But I've found that I've had quite a variety of people hopping on, and I think it's because so many people are, even though they're zoomed out and fatigued, they really want to be part of a community and understand where they can go for information. Primarily the businesses I work with that don't have an HR person often don't know how to navigate. So whatever has been going on, and Hilda, who's joined us today, is also in the industry and a colleague of mine who does a lot of management training. She has a great program called Rev Up, and we've been working on a lot of this together. And if you haven't had a chance, all of the videos are up on our YouTube channel, Life Works Well. You can check it out. Lots of resources in there. And the back to school session a couple of weeks ago was really interesting. We had a guest from the US come up, and there's just a lot of things that are going on right now. Parents juggling back to school decisions. Now they're in class, a lot of the younger children navigating back to work if they're being pressured. And then so part of this series was really trying to find the support for all of that's going on. And then later I'm thinking, it's all about we need to get back to basics. And Taylor, who's here with me as part of the team, thank you for all your help. But, we've been talking a lot about self-care as well. And that is part of it, is really just getting back to being grounded and back to basics to support ourselves so we can get through this together. It is a lot going on. If anybody watched the debate last night, I could use a few words, but I'm trying to be, a professional here. So today, what are we going to cover about back to work? Where are we now? Checking in at the 6-month mark. Where are organizations? Are they back? Are they, this wave starting? Are they going to be going back home? We've been juggling so much. So I thought I'd give a little bit of update on what's happening here locally in Toronto, provincial and federal viewpoints. The bill just got passed today for some of the new measures, but it has to go through the Senate. We're going to talk a little bit about risk assessments and protocols for return to work. A little bit of a recap on back to school and how it relates to back to work, because we're really just a couple weeks into that, and who knows where that's going to go. Also, we talked a little bit last time about accommodation and handling back to school and work issues, and how that's intersecting again with potentially, having to juggle care at home, not being able to go back to an office. How do you navigate some of that family responsibility and family status, human rights issues? And then talk again, as we always do, we go back to talking about self-care for HR, for leaders and employees. Look at a couple resources and a Q&A. And remember, this is always meant to be interactive, so I'll pause for questions and comments throughout. Put something in the chat if you like as well. Okay, before we begin, I just wanted to acknowledge today is Orange Shirt Day, and I'm wearing my orange, and I think Taylor is. And I was trying to find one for Cullen. We found one at Tim's, and I'm just so thrilled that the schools are actually doing something about this. And so this started 2013. And so September 30th, it's a day to acknowledge the many Indigenous people and children in our country who were forced to leave their homes and pushed into residential schools. So Phyllis Webstad, who started this initiative, and it's to honor her and to create that further awareness. As you know, there's been the Truth and Reconciliation happening over the last couple of years, and we've had Black Lives Matter happening. We can't forget about our Indigenous peoples, so I wanted to honor that today. And I also wanted to remind people when, you know, when we're doing events and you know, HR is often the one that's reminding, when it's anything to do with equity, diversity, and inclusion, reminding our leaders to acknowledge the land that belonged to the traditional territory of many nations in our country. So I wanted to honor and recognize that today as well, that this land was traditionally the territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, I always get that, I'm working on that, and the Wendat peoples. And it's also home to many diverse First Nations and Inuit and Métis people. So I think that we have a lot of work to do in so many areas, and we'll be covering quite a bit of a lot of other equity and diversity inclusions and other back to basics and acknowledgements in the future. So government updates. So for those who are listening later, and for those on, and Hilda, I don't know if you've been getting updates on this, obviously, because you keep up to speed on this as well, but Bill C4 is where was passed today, and I believe it was I think it was unanimous. And basically that's the new guidelines for all of the financial support, the new economic plan for the federal government. And so you may have heard in the news that CERB is now being phased out, and there'll be other additional employment insurance supports. There are continuing some supports for businesses. I've put a link here, so when you get the presentation after, remember to always go to this site to get any kind of updates. I'm assuming the Senate will pass and it'll get through, but so basically that's one of it. Also, for those who don't qualify for some of those benefits, and students, I think, were acknowledged a lot in this one as well, that there are some other supports. I'm not going to go into all of the details, but there was some good news. I mean, the governments are having to spend and set up millions and billions of dollars of funding to try to support. Even lately, the restaurant industry has been banding together to try to see what supports they're going to get, because those industries are really hard hit. And so we are in this difficult fiscal time. And so how do we continue to keep up to that, keep positive, keep trying to move our businesses forward and shift and support people? So that's what part of it is today. And I think it's important that we keep up to date. So the federal level, again, for those, this is just a refresher. And I think you know what, I met my slide that had the others. This, I'll have to update it when I send it out. The City of Toronto, because I'm local, but if you're in another part of Ontario or across the country, you want to look at all three levels of the governments for what supports and what you need to know about COVID-19. So the City of Toronto has a site that you can go to for any of the updates on what's happening. Again, there's always changing as to how many people can gather indoors, outdoors. It was just changed recently. The fines are going up because people aren't following the protocols. And so it's no wonder we're in the second wave, the wave happening. So it's, again, I'll update this and send the link to you. This is it. I was trying to update this, and then I think I must have removed it by accident. But so that's important. Always look at your local. And then of course the provincial government, and some of these resources, links, I've actually included in prior sessions, and at the end of the slides, I always try to put them in as well. But those are always the three levels of government that are working together to make sure. So that's really important when we're looking at return to work. and back to work. So one of the things to remember, and again, because we're at so many different stages of what organizations are doing, and it's often sometimes hard to get the information that makes sense for you. But the first thing every organization has to do, and they've been doing this along over the last 6 months as to when they're getting ready to go back to work. Some haven't even started their return to work. Some of the clients I work with are waiting until January, and there's sporadic people going in. But the first thing you need to do is make sure you're doing your risk assessment. You know, conduct a risk assessment that's relevant for your organization. And you look at the physical space. You know, you're going to have to put in, and most people have already done this, but this is a reminder for those that may not have. And, you know, there's a lot of leased space available right now. So you never know if you're going to decide to go back. So signage, protocols, floor markers, furniture, you have to look at everything. And communication is key. So one of the things what we did with one of our clients was conduct some focus groups, because we have offices across the country and it may be different. For example, in BC, they've already opened up much earlier than here. And so they're doing a couple of days in the office. They're making sure there's only a couple people in. So you want to conduct focus groups, gauge how everybody's feeling. Everybody has different unique situations, and you may not be able to adjust to everybody unless it's a legitimate accommodation, and we'll talk about that. But you can gauge that. And can you work remotely? We've been finding that people have been successful working remotely. So this is all part of your risk assessment. But keeping the communication open, and I know Hilda has done a couple sessions on this, the importance of employee ongoing communications. People want to know what's going on. You don't want to inundate them with too much, but you want to just be transparent and open and provide supports. And then conduct screening. So once they are going to be re-entering, even if it's sporadic. So for example, if I wanted to go into one of the offices, there's public health forms that need to be filled out. You've probably done this at many of your places that you visited if you're going for physiotherapy or a massage, where it's the checklist that you have to answer the protocols on, whether you have any symptoms, etc. So all of that is part of the risk assessment and protocols that you have to put in place. No more birthday cakes. This is the part that people will miss, and me especially. And these cupcakes were something from a Canada Day event a long time ago. But, you know, that's the thing, is how do you adjust to this new reality? Because I don't think it's normal, and I don't like saying new normal, because this is not normal. This is our new reality, that, you know, how we are engaging with each other virtually, but also when we do re-enter, and everybody's going to be at different phases. And so some are doing a phased in re-entry. You know, you're going to have flexible policies in place. And if you haven't been doing this, it's time. You have to start thinking about it, even if you're planning to re-enter later. You know, it's good to be prepared. Workplace ergonomics, and I believe that's important for both at the office and at home, because the last thing we're going to want is increased workers' insurance claims. And I think a lot of people don't think about those types of things. What are the changes required particularly? So hygiene and cleaning, again, in some cases, some of the clients I've worked with have had created little kits. So each person has their own kitchen supplies or whatever in a little kit. If they have to use the kitchen, they take that and then they can wash it and put it away and then wipe after. So, you know, I think that this is, again, how far do we go? I mean, obviously for a lot of people, they think let's just not bother because we'll be a lot safer if we don't go back to work. But there are some cases where people are having to go into facilities. And again, depending on if you're manufacturing or office, your risk assessment and the protocols you create may change a little bit. So really it's all about, a lot of it's confidentiality, developing a plan to protect employees, training, communication, maintaining all the physical distancing, and then the PPE, you know, are you providing it? So I'm going to pause there for a minute. And I have a checklist that we developed, Life Works Well, that will be on our website when we post all of these resources. And it's a much more details. These are actually all the headings, but there's a lot more detail for them. And a lot of this, you can navigate through public health and all of these websites, but we've tried to condense it so that organizations can use it. So are there any questions so far or comments? I'm curious for those on the call as to whether or not, what stage their workplace is at right now. Are they still working remote? Are they, you know, or if you have clients, are they going back in? I'm just curious as to where people are at 6 months in, if anybody wanted to comment.
We've been working, it's Hilda, we've been working remotely and, you know, have no plans to continue. In fact, one of my staff decided to move to Quebec because that's where her partner works out of. So she said, rather than going back and forth, what is it okay? So we've been actually really working remotely. Yeah. I'm sharing an anecdote with her, that I shared, that I found out that somebody was working in Montreal, and they were leaving their company. So they brought goodbye cake. And of course, you can imagine she delivered goodbye cake to everybody who was there that day. And then found out afterwards that the person who she was kind of handing off her work to ended up testing positive for COVID. So she had to be tested positive. She had to be tested for COVID, and everybody who got birthday or goodbye cake also needed to. So you can imagine the anxiety, what the company had to do, because everybody had to be on isolation now till they were tested to see what would happen. So I liked when you said no more birthday cakes.
Well, that's great. Thanks for sharing that, because I think that is the thing, is there's so much fear, and it's understandable, right? This is the world we're in right now. And so if you haven't seen Taylor's blog that she wrote on her, you know, thoughts on what the future of work might look like, she talks a little bit about that on our website, that it's, you know, we've shown that we can work like this. This is the future of work, remote work. I mean, how it impacts balance and work-life harmony. There's so many benefits to it. And in this time where the cases are going up, I would suspect that even if there have been some that are going to the office right now, they're going to peel that back again. So it's, again, the thing is, it's all over. This is like a roller coaster for everybody. And I think safety and health has got to be always top of mind. And so it's little things that sometimes people forget about. And then I think with the summer weather and with people just getting so tired and exhausted with this, that, you know, they want to see people. And then we saw, you know, people gathering more, and you can't, we have to be diligent. So we as HR leaders and those leaders in entrepreneurs and smaller medium businesses that don't have the day-to-day HR support have had to try to figure all of this out and take ownership for it. And it's just, again, that's why I'm almost thinking, you know, for the next session, it's going back to basics, because a lot of this basics, if you had plans in place, you wouldn't be scrambling, right? And what's interesting is I found when I was cleaning out some clutter in my basement, I found an old thing from 2009. So it must have been, I don't know if that must have been the SARS or the H1N1, the other one. Anyway, it was all about creating a pandemic plan. And so creating I think Katie joined today. Hi, Katie. It's, creating a pandemic plan. Back in 2009, I think the materials were, and people, if they didn't do it, they're again reopening it now. So I think there's going to be a lot of people that have prepared for crisis, hopefully. So this is us right now. Oh my gosh, no one wants to go back.
Helen, Can I make one more observation
Sure.
too? What I'm finding is that September's always been that time of renewal, right? Everybody's going back to school. They've had a great summer off. And I think with that return has become, everybody's sensing the second wave is coming. They're anxious about this, you know, people going back to school. And I've noticed a heightened anxiety in people in general. I, and you're right. I mean, when you are living through something 2 months, a month, you can live through that kind of stress and manage. But now we're into 6 months, as you say, and that means it's more chronic now. And there's no end in the foreseeable, you know, near future. So people now are really starting to feel that stress even more so than they did. I think summer was that reprieve to get outdoors, to really manage the stress. And now we're getting to the point where we're thinking, okay, it's going to be winter soon, particularly in Canada. So a lot
Yeah.
of stress. And I see that in the clients, the people I connect with, the networks that I've been in. It's so how do we get out of it, right?
Well, that's it. And
How
that's
do we?
why I know. And, you know, it's interesting you say that, because I just had a couple discussions with people that are in the, you know, resilience, teach, you know, deal with mental health strategies and counseling, which we always talk about, in self-care on these sessions, because at the 6-month mark of any kind of crisis, we're at this inflection point, and everybody, I have been even feeling it a lot more. And, you know, you're juggling back to school, you've got the fear of that. And so there's this, you do feel the energy, you do feel the change in, like, there's more anxiety, and you have to find ways to cope, like, once we can get through the next wave. But that's where it's building resilience and the skill sets for employees and for leaders and for, you know, the next generation who's inheriting a lot. It's really important to get those supports in place. And that's why some of these communities, you know, really you need to use your employee and family assistance programs. You have to repeat it over and over again and remind people, because it is an historic time. This is, you know, nothing we've experienced at this level. So thanks for that. Just a couple stats, and I'm hoping to update this, but this was back from July, and StatsCan is always a little bit behind in getting their updated stats out. But at this time, there were 4 in 10 Canadians still working at home and who didn't feel safe. And I'm guessing this has gone up. But so I go back, the link is there again when I send it out. So you can go back to Stats Canada and continue to see, you know, how this might change in a few months. But it's the fears, right? There's a lot of fears, and most people are very, very uncomfortable and continue to be. So, but there are people working in offices. I know many that have had to go back, and they had to. So, you know, this is where we're in this. The right thing is to try to keep the distance and to protect and keep it safe and keep people healthy. Yet there's some leaders and businesses that don't understand, you know, how much fear and anxiety there is with this, and trying to find the right measures in place. And then I'm wondering too, if when I go back to Stats Canada, hopefully in a couple months, they'll have it updated, or even soon. You know, how's this changed since back to school? You know, one of the things is, you know, there's this whole, in Toronto, as you know, we changed the indoor numbers, yet the school, you know, the classroom sizes are like 20 plus in some cases. And so now I'm starting to get a little bit anxiety. But, you know, you're balancing mental health issues of children with family and trying to work, and you just have to navigate it as best you can and hope that they're creating safe spaces. And the last session that we had, the back to school, there was a lot of really good open dialogue on that. If you want to check out the video, it's really was a very open dialogue about, you know, it's even, you know, really, really different in the States versus Canada. and different, you know, we've already had, I think on the news, the Toronto District School Board, one of the elementary schools has, they're reporting cases. So, you know, I expect we're going to be back to online school for a lot of people. And, you know, even one of my colleagues, my friend, she said she can see the difference for the high school age where they're sometimes online and sometimes going to school. And they're so much happier when they're going to school versus being on this computer and at home all day long. So Hilda and I, we've talked a lot about the mental health challenges, and I think we're going to see a lot of the increase as we continue. So I'm just going to mention one of the things I wanted to mention was, and I mentioned this last time, if you're not already aware of the flexibility and accommodation that's available, I'm referring here to Ontario, but across every province, there will be other legislation that's very similar to job protection. Sorry, I forgot to get my water. So this protection was there when we first started COVID, and everything got closed down, and there was childcare responsibilities and daycares and the schools closing down. The infectious disease emergency leave was commenced, and it's there for support for employees. So if they needed to take a leave of absence, an employer can't refuse, and their job is protected. So that's one thing to keep in mind that's still available, because there are still going to be situations where the childcare responsibilities are impacting the person's ability to work. And so that's under the Employment Standards Act. And then there's also family status accommodation, which goes a little bit broader under the human rights legislation. And so I think it's really important, if you're a business owner or an employer, you need to make sure you understand some of this, because I think a lot of times people may not realize everything, that all the legislation that's been enacted, sorry, it's just a little tickle. Don't worry. This is the other thing, we're all worried about coughing or sneezing, and it's allergy season. It's a tough time we're living in. So, you know, family status accommodation, and there may be some individuals that have different needs than others. And so you have to look at individual circumstances when you're talking about leaves of absence or family status accommodation. You can't just sort of create policies that apply to everybody and think that they're going to work. So it's always important to understand what's going on there before you say, oh, well, then I'm not, you know, you're resigning if you can't work, right? So that's where it's important to be able to ask people questions and have, you know, either an HR consultant or an employment lawyer that you can go to. Not all smaller companies have that. So, and then, you know, it's interesting, because I think about the best part about going to work is coming back home again. I thought that was a pretty funny quote. I don't know where that came from, but it's like when you go for vacation too. In the old days, it was like, oh, you had this great vacation, then you got to go back to work. But work's supposed to be fun, right? I don't know if anybody's having any fun right now. We're trying, but it's not always easy. And then I'm going to check my tech here. I have a cute little, this is how I feel sometimes, but not in a fun way. I was just thinking about I'm going to lose my presentation. I'll get it back up here. There we go. When normally you're excited, you know, it's like back to school's exciting and going back to work. If everybody's happy to see you after you've been there, but right now it's a completely different world. So, so I wanted to, again, open it up, take a pause before we go there. Oops. Does anyone have any questions about some of the legislative requirements? Not everybody might have been aware of this. If there's anything that anybody has any questions at this point about family status accommodation or some of these other employment standards requirements. We had a small group today. It's going to be a shorter one maybe as well, but that's okay. Sometimes I go way too long. I'm wondering, Hilda, because it's great to have you on today because you're in the same field. Are you finding that employers are having to juggle these kinds of requests right now with your clients? As far as the whole, family status accommodation, needing to take care of people at home. Oh, I think you're on mute. Yeah.
I thought I cleared it. Thanks for asking, Helen. And I think that some of my clients don't even think to ask me till they get into trouble. And then others kind of ask ahead of time. And I think the hardest part is helping them understand the idol, because there's two idols. One was the original one, and then this one in, I forget the terminology for it, but it's kind of there but not there. And I think there are so many permutations and combinations, and you really have to have that dialogue with somebody who kind of can walk you through the outcome of some of the strategies. Because I mean, you can't terminate people because they're not accommodating. You have to really listen to hear if there's a real reason that is protected under law, and educate the business owners. And I think in some cases, I think the staff feel they have more rights than they do, and then in other cases, managers feel they have less rights than they actually do. So people are understating and overstating their needs because they don't truly understand what the legislation does in terms of protecting and not protecting.
Mm-hmm. Oops. Yeah, that's helpful, because I find the same thing. Even in one recent case in another area in Ontario, the buses, well, in a lot of areas with the back to school, the buses weren't starting up yet. And so even simple things like accommodating a flexibility in schedule, you can't just, you need to kind of keep in mind that all of a sudden, in order for, if they were putting, they have lots of children. So some parents really needed to put their kids back in school because they're trying to work while they have 3 kids or 3 children that they're trying to juggle managing that. And when the buses weren't going, you are going to have to figure out how to travel to get them. And normally in our day-to-day prior to the pandemic, we would not necessarily say, well, it's your responsibility to kind of figure those things out, and we expect you to work 9 to 5 and that's it. But there's a little bit more openness to flexibility, which is good. And then in that case, there's a little bit more protection, it seems, right now because of the pandemic. But it opens up the dialogue to, well, why are we, the whole thing about if your work is being done and the outcome is happening, if you do need to pick up your children at 3:00 and you're working remote, and then you go online an hour later to finish off, are we going to see more openness even when we return to work for those types of flexibility? I know the federal government, quite a couple years ago, they did a white paper and an analysis and research on legislating flexibility in the workplace. And so again, a lot of what we're seeing now was the future of work we thought maybe 5 years from now or even 10 years from now, where, technology driven, everything is remote, or there's a lot more flexibility to do your work whenever, it's in a restaurant or on a plane when no one's flying right now. But all of that we're seeing is potentially going to maybe be sooner. So we'll have to keep our eyes on that to see if there is anything outside of the human rights where there will be more flexibility, mandated. I didn't think so, but now I'm thinking I'm more open to that as a possibility.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a shift in a lot of things. In fact, even the education system. I was talking to a former principal and asking him what he's sensing, what he's hearing from his colleagues. And it is a moving target because, people would say, yes, I'm bringing my kids back to school. And then of a sudden the number of increases happen, and then they decide to pull them out and do virtual. Well, then that affects the school system, because they budgeted for, say, 20 students to be working for coming to school, and then 10 to be virtual. And all of a sudden that shifts to 20 are virtual now and 10 are in the classrooms. And they just don't have the manpower to have two sets of classes going, one in a virtual world and one in the physical world. And it is a moving target. So it was interesting for me to hear that perspective, because you make a decision as a parent, but it has a ripple effect on everybody and the system.
Yeah, and right now in Ontario, I was listening to the radio the other day, and they were talking about they're looking for all kinds of retired teachers to come out of retirement in order to help with some of the online. And that there was just not preparation, even though we closed the schools in March, and then it's September, and they still weren't prepared, and it kept getting delayed. So I get it. This is huge. So I think that's we'll wait and see. I think by the time I have my next mentor circle, which is October 14th, things will change again. So we'll get an update then. One of the things, again, that we always talk about, the importance when we're talking about back to work, for those that have to go back, and they feel they can't say no. There's a lot of that fear. There's a lot of stress, and not every organization has employee assistance programs, but there are a lot of mental health resources out there. The school, I posted a lot of other resources last time. They have School Mental Health Ontario. There's a lot of resources for teachers, but there's also resources for parents to, sit down with their children. If they haven't done meditation, they can kind of learn. There's other tips. Canadian Mental Health Association. There are lots of great resources out there. One of the things I like at the student college university level is jack.org. And, that organization has done a lot for mental health in colleges and universities. So that's another good resource. It's really, really important, the self-care. And I'm not always great at it either. Like the days that I'm not exercising or taking a bit of quiet time or getting pulled in too many directions, it doesn't help you kind of manage the rest of your life. So it's really important to take those pauses and try the meditation, do the yoga. Maybe I know Taylor, I don't know if you wanted to, in her article, also talking about self-care for the younger generations of employees are living in a different world. And so you're trying to start your career out and either interview online or keep your health up. And I don't know, Taylor, if you wanted to comment a little bit about how you're navigating the back to work in this climate of pandemic. It's interesting. We've just started working together a few months ago and had worked together before, but I don't know if you feel like sharing your thoughts on how the back to work is going, and how you feel you're coping with making it work.
Well, as you said before, of course, wellness, self-care, what we talked about in the last session, just kind of like knowing when to put stuff down and just taking a break, whether it be yoga, whether it be Netflix, whatever you need to do. But in terms of navigating the job search and everything, and I think it applies to before, something I should have been telling myself before, even before the pandemic, is not to be too hard on yourself. Everybody is in the same position in terms of lockdown, quarantine, all that. Everybody's kind of going through it. And for those of us that are looking for a job, it's kind of that extra bit of stress, but you shouldn't be too hard on yourself. things are happening, things are out of your control. You kind of just have to like apply what you can apply for, know your strengths, know your weaknesses, but also like don't be too frustrated if you don't see anything that you're looking for or you don't get that position, because it just comes down to like just keep going, because we could go back into lockdown again, and then there won't be many like, you know, postings or anything, and that'll be even more frustrating. But I think it really just comes down to like not being too hard on yourself and taking all the breaks you need, because we're in this for the long run. So
Mm-hmm. And so interesting, when I set the series, this was a bit, you know, I was thinking about this in the summer because we were talking about back to work, but in reality, it may be that we're going to have a lot less back to work, and we're going to be going, for those that started, are going to be going back to remote. So it's just continuing to navigate, but regardless, at some point there will be, you know, that time that it happens, and all of this is going to have to be, you know, we have to be mindful of all this all the time, and the self-care, and the, you know, I found, because summer's always nice, people take vacations and they slow down a tiny bit. They're taking, you know, a little bit more, maybe not so much this year as much as previous years. There's not as much travel, but a lot of people were out camping. They were getting out and outdoors, enjoying Canada more. And then it always feels like September becomes this big rush again. And I even felt that, even though we were remote and we were not like, you know, the normal rushing to get kids to school, then get to work, then pick them up, then get them to hockey, whatever, that there's a lot less, but it still felt the same kind of rush and busyness. And that's not good. You know, this is, if anything we've learned from this time, hopefully we're going to start to slow down. And that's why I'm thinking like that's where the back to basics is coming next for the next set. The third one of this series and ongoing is going back to the supports we need, whether it's understanding what we need to do with our finances, our health, our, you know, our whole circle of being. And that's what a lot of the work that Hilda and I both do is trying to bring, you know, that authenticity and wholeness to the workplace. You know, we are humans first, and we are human beings, and how are we, and I think that is our hope for people like us, that the leaders will understand, and we're going to see a little bit more humanity coming into the workplace. And I think that that's a lot of the reason why Hilda and I are out doing these support groups and circles and education sessions. Now, I know Katie and Jennifer have been a little bit quiet, but that's okay. If you feel like piping up, you just let us know. We're getting close to finishing up, but these are some of the other links. Again, I will send this out. And yeah, I think it's really important that we try to continue to focus on getting ourselves through this, through resilience, having others that you can talk to, and getting educated about what you need to know. There's a lot of fake news. There's a lot of stuff. I mean, we've been feeling so much layered on this, and you know, we're continuing to do work with respect to the Black Lives Movement matter, and you know, Indigenous peoples, equity, diversity, inclusion in the workplace, and also just the day-to-day. Back to basics is really talking about you know, human relations, no dysfunction in the workplace, you know, good communication, like things that we sometimes take for granted. So that's kind of what we covered. I don't know if anybody has any questions. If Katie and Jennifer are probably too shy to say anything, that's okay. The next session, as I said, is going to be about back to basics. And we're going to do a little bit of a financial update. And I have a guest named, her name is Louise Stevenson. She's been on a couple mental circles in the past as well. And she's going to give us a little bit of a market update and look at, you know, how to, especially for the entrepreneurs and business leaders. But it's beneficial to everybody to be thinking about how to navigate, you know, what are the impacts of the market. You know, it's going to be closer to the election coming up in the US, and how that impacts what we do as well, what we can do to kind of navigate all these ups and downs and impacts. So we haven't done a lot on finances. We did have Jackie Porter on a session on navigating, you know, some of the financial impacts and the federal supports. There will be some more. So we'll roll that in as well. So I'm just going to leave it at there unless anyone wants to give any final thoughts before we wrap up for today. And I'm actually, you know, we had a bit more extra time today, so that's okay. I didn't have as many logistic technology issues. Final closing thoughts or questions? Okay, you know what? Let me just exit. I'm going to just stop the share here. Whoops. There we go. So, yeah, so thanks again, everybody, for joining. Oh, I did see a couple things in the chat, but I probably missed them. Okay. Yeah, so I really appreciate everyone coming on, and we'll be having the next session October 14th, and then we're thinking through what we're going to be doing. November is Financial Literacy Month, so we could do a lot around that. I think, again, depending on what's happening in the return to work and what's happening at the school space, we'll probably have a lot to talk about. But I hope everybody enjoys today. Check out the Orange Shirt Day organization, great organization. And I hope to see you again on here next time. So have a great day, everybody. Thank you.